All right, class. So in this lesson, we're looking at solving rational equations. Remember that before we looked at adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing equations. So now we're going to put it together and we're going to actually solve for x. So you need to understand the basic terminology, such as rational numbers, rational expressions, all that stuff that we talked about, least common denominators. And you need to know how to add, subtract fractions, multiply, divide, all that good stuff, as well as know the procedure that we're using in this lesson. So first, let's talk about rational equations. So a rational equation is an equation that involves fractions. When you solve an equation, you got to be careful that you don't get what we call extraneous solutions. So extraneous solutions are solutions that when you plug in to the original equation leads to a contradiction or an error. Sometimes you'll get like two solutions and one of them doesn't work when you plug it into the problem. So you have to be able to plug both solutions in to make sure that you don't get any errors. Now when you solve these guys, make sure to, just like we said, substitute your answer or plug your answer back in. All right, what are the errors that you can get? Well, usually the errors that you get when you plug it in, if it's an extraneous solution, is when you get division by zero. Remember that you can't divide by zero. One type of equation that we'll look at is when you have a fraction equal to a fraction. We call those proportions. So in the first example, we have a proportion. We have a fraction equal to a fraction. So in order to solve, we're going to use cross multiplication. So we're going to cross multiply here. So when you cross multiply, you're going to go straight diagonal like that and diagonal like this. So you're going to multiply these two, and then you're going to multiply these two. All right, so you're going to start with an equal sign. On the left side of the equal sign, we are multiplying x times x minus 4. On the right side, we have 1 times x minus 6. All right, 1 times x minus 6, it doesn't change anything. You still have x minus 6. And we have x times x minus 4. You're going to distribute. So you have x squared minus 4x equals x minus 6. Now you can go ahead and solve. You want to move the x over to this side, and then you want to move the 6 over, because we know that this is a quadratic equation. So we have to be able to solve this using the factoring methods. So we're going to move the x over by subtracting that. So now we get negative 5x. Now we need to make the right side equal to 0. Whenever you have a quadratic with power of 2, you usually need to make the right side 0. So we need to move this over. So add 6 to both sides. All right, now this is where we use our factoring. So in this case, we need the factors of 6 to add up to negative 5. So if you do that here, the factors of 6 that add up to negative 5, which in this case is negative 3 and negative 2. So we're left with x minus 3, x minus 2 equals 0. So now what we do is we need to figure out what makes this 0, what makes this 0. The only thing that makes this 0 is 3, because if we say x minus 3 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0, so the only thing that makes this 0 is you solve for x and you get 3. Same thing here, you add 2 to both sides, and you get x is equal to 2. All right, so those are your two solutions. Make sure that you don't get any extraneous solutions. So we're going to plug those guys in to the original, just to make sure. So if we get 3, we get 3 over 3 minus 6. All right, so we don't get division by 0. And then if you plug in 1 over 3 minus 4, you don't get division by 0, so that's fine. So let me show you how that works. We just plug it in. So we get 3 over 3 minus 6 equals 1 over 3 minus 4. And this is 3 over negative 3 equals 1 over negative 1. We don't have any division by zeros, so it looks like we're good. So this checks out. 3 divided by negative 3 is negative 1. So this checks out. Now let's plug in the 2 in. Same thing. So we got 2 over 2 minus 6 equals 1 over 2 minus 4. So we got 2 over negative 4, 1 over negative 2. So this is negative 1/2, and this is negative 1/2. So this checks out, okay? So usually the errors you want to look out for is if you have division by 0. So these look fine. This is just to check your work, all right, and make sure that there's no extraneous solutions. So now let's look at the second one. So for the second one, we need to cross multiply since it's a proportion. So on the left side of the equal sign, we have 2 times x plus 4. On the right side, we have 1 times x squared plus 4x. So we need to distribute. So 2x plus 8. 1 times anything is whatever is inside, so we're good there. We don't have to do anything to that inside. We had a quadratic, so make one side equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the left side equal to 0. So I'm going to move the 2x over by subtracting it. So you have 8 equals x squared plus 2x. Now we need to move the 8 over, because remember, when you have a quadratic with a power of 2, you need to make one side 0. So I'm going to make that left side 0, subtract 8. All right, now we got a quadratic equal to 0, similar to what we had before in the other problem. So we need to factor this. So we have factors of negative 8 that add up to 2, which is 6 and negative, I'm sorry, not 6. 4 and negative 2. So we get 0 equals, now we can factor x plus 4, x minus 2. All right, so now we can go ahead and solve for x. So we're going to make this 0, make that 0. So x plus 4 equals 0, and then x minus 2 equals 0. So solve for x here. X equals negative 4. Do the same there. X is equal to 2. All right. And then you make sure that you plug that in so that you don't have any extraneous solutions. So we're going to try to plug that in just in case. So let's plug in the negative 4. So you're going to plug in negative 4 into x squared there, or into x. So we have 2 over x squared plus 4 times negative 4 equal to 1 over negative 4 plus 4. All right, so now it looks like we get 2 over 16 minus 16 equals 1 over 0. So it looks like we got a 1 over 0 there, 0 there. So that means negative 4 is an extraneous solution. Okay? So this is a perfect example of when it does not work. This is why you want to plug in, make sure that there's no errors, so you're good to go. So now we have x equals 2. We're going to plug that in as well. If you plug that in, you're not going to get any zeros on the denominator because 2 squared plus 4, that's positive. 2 plus 4, that's positive. So you should be good to go. You don't have to plug it in. And it should not be an extraneous solution. So you're good there. So final answer. So basically, our final answer is x equal to 2. All right, so basically this goes away. All right, so now we're looking at another type of an equation. So another type of equation that we like to consider is the type that involves more than one fraction, where we have either common denominators or we don't have any common denominators. So sometimes you need to find a common denominator. So in general, we want to find a common denominator for all numbers involved. Okay, so notice that this is not just a fraction equal to a fraction. It's a fraction, and then you have an expression on one side. All right, so let's look at number 3. So for number 3, basically what you want to do is you want to combine the fraction with the numbers together. So basically get one common denominator. All right, so what I like to do is first find the least common denominator, and then generally multiply everything by that common denominator just to make things simpler. All right, so we're going to try doing that. Okay, so let's find the least common denominator. In this case, we only got an x minus 2 here, so we're going to give it an x minus 2. Remember that this has an invisible 1. All right, so the least common denominator is simply x minus 2. So there's nothing too crazy for that one. So we take that x minus 2 and we multiply both sides by it. So this side and this side. All right, so notice that if I multiply x minus 2, they cancel here. So that leaves us with 5x equals, now you need to distribute this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the process. So we got to do 7 plus 10 over x minus 2 times x minus 2. Okay, so notice that if I multiply x minus 2 here, it cancels. But you got to remember that you got to distribute it to this guy as well as to this guy, right? So in this case, the 7 needs to be distributed with the x minus 2. Now, for this part, we have this times x minus 2, but it cancels, so I'll show you that. All right, so that gets distributed with x minus 2, but this cancels, so there's no more. So now we're left with this part. All right, and then we got the left side is equal to 5x, so I'm going to write that out. All right, so now we need to simplify this. So 7 times x, and then 7 times negative 2. So we have 7x minus 14, and we have 5x. So now we're going to solve this equation. Oh, I forgot the plus 10. There's a plus 10 from this guy right here. All right, so now combine like terms. So we got 5x equals 7x minus 4, 14 plus 10. And then we're going to solve for x, so I'm going to move the 7x over here by subtracting. I get negative 2x here equals negative 4. Divide by negative 2. X is equal to 2. So I got positive 2. Now we're going to plug that in to make sure that, just to make sure that there aren't any other solutions here. Or to make sure that this is not an extraneous solution. All right, so then if we plug it in, we get 2 minus 2 here, which is 0. And we get 2 minus 2 here, which is 0. So it looks like there's not, this is an extraneous solution. So I'll show you. If you plug in 2 here, you get 5 times 2 over 2 minus 2. And then you get 2 minus 2. So you get 0 in the denominator, which is an error. All right, so this is an extraneous solution. All right, so it's not a solution. That means that there is no other solution, because this is the only solution that I got here. Okay, so that means there's no solution. So let me write that down over here. No solution. All right, let's look at number 4. All right, so for number 4, we need to do the same thing. We need to find the least common denominator. So we got a least common denominator. So we got an x here, right? And we got a 2. So we got 1x on here. We have no x's here. We have 1x there, so you're going to pick 1x. We have no 2's here, but we have a 2 here. No 2's here. We're going to pick the one with the most 2's, which is just 1. So 2x is our LCD. So we're going to multiply both sides by the LCD. All right, so we're going to multiply both sides by 2x. Okay, so we have 2x times 3 over x minus 1 over 2 and 12 over x times 2x. All right, so we got x's cancel out here. 12 times 2 is 24. Now we got 2x times this guy. So x's cancel out here, right? So 2x, so let me write it out. 2x times 3 is 6x. 1 times x is x, since there's an invisible 1 underneath the 2. And then we have 2x times 1 is 2x. And then 1 times 2 is 2. So notice that these cancel and these cancel. So it leaves you with 6 minus x equals 24. So you're going to solve for x by subtracting 6 on both sides. So you get 18. So that means x has to be negative 18. If negative x is 18, that means regular x is negative 18. So now we're going to plug that in to make sure we don't get any controversies or any errors. So we got 3 over negative 18 minus 1/2 equals 12 over negative 18. So it looks like we don't get division by 0, which is good. So that means we probably are good. But let's just make sure that this actually checks out. So this is going to be, this can reduce to negative 1 over 6. This can reduce as well. We can divide this by 6 on top and bottom. So we get 2 over negative 3. So now, combine these two fractions, we need a common denominator. So this needs to be a 6. So I need to times it by 3. Whatever I do on bottom, I do on top. So I got negative 1 over 6 minus 3 over 6, which is negative 4 over 6. And that is the same thing as negative 2/3. So this checks out. All right, if you have problems with fractions, just give it some practice. Don't give up on the fractions part. Just give it a try. Try it on the calculator as well, and you should see that they'll match up. All right, so we got 2 more problems here that we want to go through. So number 5. So we need to find the least common denominator. So this is already factored. This is already factored. This guy we need to factor. All right, so let's factor this guy. Remember that when you do this, this is the difference of squares, or you can think of it as an x table. We have negative 9 on the top. And on the bottom we have 0. So 2 numbers that work out for this are negative 3 and negative 3. So now we can factor this guy. So this guy becomes x minus 3, x plus 3. So let me rewrite this. All right, so now our LCD. So let's do our least common denominator. So our least common denominator is, so we have 1x minus 3 here, we have none here, and we have 1 here. So you're going to pick the one with the most, which is just 1. All right, we have no x plus 3's here. We have 1 x plus 3 here. We have 1 here. So we're going to pick 1. So in this case, our LCD is just this guy. So we're going to multiply both sides by the LCD. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by the LCD. So x minus 3, x plus 3. All right, so now when I multiply this against this guy, notice that the x minus 3's cancel, okay? So the x minus 3's cancel here, and the x plus 3's cancel here. All right, so you just got to be very careful here. So I'm going to rewrite this so that you know how I distribute this, okay? So we have this guy times this plus this guy times this. So we have x minus 3, x plus 3 times that fraction plus another x minus 3, x plus 3 times the second fraction. All right, and of course it's equal to, and we need to multiply this as well, right? So 18 times x minus 3, x plus 3. So I'm going to write that over here, equals 18 over x minus 3, x plus 3, and then we're multiplying that as well. We're multiplying everything by the LCD. All right, so now notice that the x minus 3's cancel here, and the x plus 3's cancel here. And everything cancels here. All right, so what you're left with is x times x plus 3. We're left with 2x times x minus 3. And we're left with 18 on the right side. So it makes it a lot simpler because we're not dealing with the fractions. We can just solve for x now. So distribute. So we got x squared plus 3x. Again, distribute here. 2x squared minus 6x. All right, combine your like terms. So we got 3x squared. So now we got to combine these. 3 minus 3 is negative 3x. Bring down to 18. Now this is quadratic, right? So we can't solve for x by itself. We have to make the right one of the sides 0. So I'm going to move this 18 over by subtracting it on both sides. Let me show you that step. So this will be 3x squared minus 3x equals 0. All right, and then, so now you're going to solve for, oops, we forgot to include the negative 18 here. Equals 0. All right, so now we need to pull out, it looks like I can pull out a 3. So instead of doing the AC method and all that stuff, let's see if we can pull out a 3. If you do, you get x squared minus x minus 6. All right, so we were able to pull out the 3. Now we can factor this using the x table. So the middle here is negative 1. So we need to find two numbers that work out here, which is going to be 3 and 2. Has to be negative 3 though. So we have 3 from here, x minus 3, x plus 2 equal to 0. So then what makes this 0? Well, x minus 3 equals 0, so x is equal to 3. What makes that 0? Well, x has to be negative 2 because negative 2 plus 2 equals 0. So x equals negative 2. Those are our two solutions. And then we need to see if any of them are extraneous. So if we plug in 3 into here, notice that we get 0 there, right? Which cannot happen. All right, so we cannot get 3 there. So this is right here is an extraneous. Now let's go ahead and see if we can plug in negative 2. So if you plug in negative 2, notice that you don't get 0 here, you don't get 0 there, and you don't get 0 there. So you should be okay for that. All right, so in this case, this checks out. There's no negative 2. All right, so now for number 7, the last one, this part looks pretty pretty big here with the trinomials, but we need to factor them to make them more manageable. So let's go ahead and factor both of these guys actually. We can pull out a 5 from here. So let's go ahead and factor this guy. So this guy, you're going to have a 6 and a negative 7, which means it has to be a 4 and a 3, negative 4, negative 3. So it becomes x minus 4, x minus 3. Oops. All right, x minus 4, x minus 3, and then this one we can pull out a 5. So let me rewrite the equation so it looks nicer. So I can pull out a 5. I get x squared minus 3x plus 4. I can factor this to x minus 4, x minus 3. Okay. This guy also factors, so we can pull, we can probably pull out a, or we can find the factors of 4 that add up to negative 3. And that might work. So factors of 4 that add up to negative 3, which is going to be 4 and 1, so negative 4. So we have 5 times x minus 4, x plus 1. All right, looks like this cancels out. So this actually works out very nicely. So we only got that one thing on the right side, x minus 3. Okay, so let me rewrite this. So we get 5 times x plus 1 over x minus 3. So it looks like our common denominator is x minus 1, x minus 6, x minus 3. So that is our least common denominator. So we need to multiply both sides by the least common denominator. So I'm going to multiply both sides by LCD. So I'm going to multiply both sides by LCD. I'm just going to write LCD there, that we're multiplying both sides by that. All right, so notice that if I do that, my x minus 1's cancel. So it leaves me with x minus 6 and x minus 3 for this guy. So I'm going to rewrite that down here. All right, now if I multiply this against this, the x minus 6 cancel. So now I'm left with x minus 1 and x minus 3. All right, and that equals, so let me continue the equal sign here since I'm running out of room. Now if I multiply the LCD by this guy, the x minus 3's cancel. And then it leaves me with x minus 6 and x minus 1 times x minus 6. But this guy cancels. All right, so we have 5 times x plus 1, x minus 1, and x minus 6. All right, so then the rest is all about solving this guy.